So we just got the very first teaser for the next NieR game, albeit it is a hair follicle of a teaser. It is nothing big, it's incredibly small, it's just a few words to suggest that the NieR series is going to continue. But the reason why this is significant is because this would be the very first time in an official capacity that Square Enix has teased the continuation of NieR Automata. Although, over the past few years, we have known that Yoko Taro has been quietly working away on a project which we can all assume is the next NieR title, which would be NieR 4, given that Reincarnation technically does count as NieR 3. Yoko Taro did mention not too long ago, though, that a lot of the projects that he has been working on over the past few years ultimately did get cancelled, hence why we haven't seen a lot of video games released under Yoko Taro for quite some time. This is some really shitty news, by the way, but we know that at least one of the projects that has likely survived the cancellations will be the next NieR. There's no way Square Enix in their right mind would ever cancel whatever is going on with NieR behind the scenes. And then obviously, after the gargantuous success of NieR Automata back in 2017 that I think far exceeded Square Enix's expectations, blowing up into what is probably got to be the most culturally impactful video game that Square Enix has released in a very long time. There is no way that they'd just sit on this IP and leave it dormant. This was actually the second attempt to bring NieR back after the first game that released back in 2010 on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 was considered to be very niche. Not a lot of people paid attention to it, but they gave it another chance, and NieR Automata blew the fuck up. But it is surprising to see that we're almost 10 years on from the release of Automata, and we still don't have a true sequel. Again, we've received Reincarnation as well as the Replicant remaster that did add some new content, but it's a little bit mind-boggling that it's taking so long to get a follow-up, even though eventually it will happen. So recently, Square Enix released a special trailer to commemorate that NieR Automata has sold a staggering 10 million copies total. Square also dropped a brand new art to commemorate 10 million copies being sold. We've got 2B, A2, and 9S standing in the city ruins with Emil's head in the sky. But if you pay close attention, you'll notice that Emil's head is actually made out of copies of NieR Automata, the Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and even Switch version of the game. And 2B is actually holding a PlayStation 4 copy of Automata, which is really cool. It's a really unique and on-brand way for Square Enix to acknowledge how many copies have been sold of the game. The most important thing we got here is at the end of that trailer, it mentions NieR Automata to be continued. Oh man, I really wish instead of like literally 2B spelt correctly, I wish it was just, you know, the number 2 and then a B. Like, perfect opportunity. Why did you not seize the moment? Anyway, this is kind of major because it tells us that a brand new NieR game in an official capacity, basically outright, is on its way. It still might not happen for a little while, like the actual release of whatever this next NieR game might not end up releasing until 2028, for example. It still might be a couple of years out, but this at least gives me the impression that Square Enix are starting to tease whatever the next big NieR project is. And what I find most interesting about this is rather than just saying NieR is to be continued, it specifically states here NieR Automata is to be continued. This could possibly suggest that the next NieR game might actually end up being a direct sequel or perhaps even a prequel to NieR Automata. And what I mean by this, because obviously it will be, right? But what I mean by this is set in the same time period as Automata. For those that don't know, both NieR Replicant, the game that comes before Automata, and Automata itself is set thousands and thousands of years apart. I believe there's about an 8 or 9,000 year gap between both games. Automata is set in the much distant future, in the year of like 11,000 or something. So rather than the next NieR game taking place in a time set between the events of Replicant and Automata, or set again in the much distant future beyond Automata's time period, maybe it will be a title that will still stay very close to the same year that Automata is set in. Because you have to think about it, what would end up being more successful? Making a NieR Automata 2 or making a new NieR with a brand new subtitle. However, I do feel as if Square Enix would be paying close attention to try keep Automata in the title of the next NieR game, because many people identify that Automata is the NieR that most people care about. Obviously, the hardcore fans aren't gonna really care about what the next game is called. It doesn't really matter. We really, at the end of the day, just want more NieR, right? But there is a significant difference between how many copies of Automata was sold compared to the very first game, or of course, the Replicant remaster. In fact, the sales figures for the Replicant remaster were actually released as well. That game has just crossed 2 million copies sold, and that's still a very impressive figure, but it's clear that most people that ended up buying the Replicant remaster are people that just really truly do care about NieR and want more NieR content. Automata, though, broke NieR out of being considered to be a niche RPG and jumped straight into the mainstream. So it might be a case that Square Enix will want to try and keep Automata within the title of the next NieR game. This is me thinking real in depth about it, right? Like thinking real psychotic about just what is being said here in this teaser. This could just be a broad way of saying NieR is going to continue, and the best way to deliver that message is to put NieR Automata. I do think though that it could be as soon as this year, and perhaps maybe even this coming summer, US summer, so looking at the month of June, that we might actually end up hearing substantially more about the next NieR project. Now look, I try my absolute best not to pay too much attention to some of the tweets that Jeff posts over on Twitter that at first glance might come across as being a tease of sorts, but ultimately ends up just being straight up bait. I've been failed by Jeff Keighley so many times where it seems like he's trying to generate some hype and might be teasing stuff, where reality is, man is just trying to go fishing. However, I should mention that Jeff made a very simple post with no writing other than the image that displays that NieR Automata is to be continued. And Summer Games Fest totally could be a prime location for Jeff to step forward to reveal the next NieR game. I'm sure this would be a reveal that he would really want as part of his show, acting as one of the big heavy hitters and one of the big holy shit moments. Of course, we also have to think that like right now, the game that most people are expecting to be revealed next from Square Enix will be Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. But this is something that people have to consider as well. Right now in the Square Enix pipeline, there are some big games that are currently cooking. Kingdom Hearts 4, Final Fantasy VII Part 3, the next NieR title, and Dragon Quest 12. Now, looking at these 4 games, the one that makes the most logical sense to release first would obviously be Kingdom Hearts 4, right? Because it's been in development the longest out of all of these. Maybe aside from Dragon Quest 12, but it's very clear that there are some kind of insane development issues and some form of development hell ensuing for that game. What will end up releasing first? Probably Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, but NieR is also another prime candidate here to be one of the next really big AAA releases from Square, coming hopefully within the next 3 years. In fact, I would argue, and this might actually sound crazy, but I think that NieR 4 will end up being a more important, more substantial release than both Kingdom Hearts 4, Dragon Quest 12, and even Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, just because if we look at the mainstream impact that Automata has had, as well as how many copies of that game has been sold. Just letting you know, there is not one single Kingdom Hearts game that has ever managed to reach 10 million copies sold. I think the most successful one is Kingdom Hearts 3, sitting around about 6 million. And I believe that other than Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy 15, there isn't a single other mainline Final Fantasy, even looking at both Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth, that has surpassed 10 million copies sold. NieR is the next big thing coming from Square Enix, and the craziest thing is, this franchise has barely even started. This does mean, by the way, that the budget that Square Enix is going to allocate for NieR 4, this next NieR title, is going to be times more substantial than the budget that was used for Automata. Because Square Enix know that this next NieR title will be successful, just given the success of Automata and how long people have had to wait for a true, proper follow-up. Ultimately meaning that there is a good chance that this could surpass the quality that we got in Automata, which is kind of crazy to think about. And I'm gonna be totally honest here, I don't know how many more NieR collaborations with other games I can handle. There is about 52 million at this point, and like the only substantial news that comes out for this IP is that, oh, look at that, NieR is collaborating with PUBG, or Nakara Blade Point. 2B9S and A2 are now in Call of Duty Mobile! And since Automata's release, this cycle seems endless. Like Square Enix have just subjected this IP to constant collaborations and merch pushing. Look, I get the whole haha funny meme with Yoko Taro mentioning that I'm open to working with anyone that wants to use NieR Automata so long as they pay me money. Good on you, bro. Like, get your bag. 100%, you've earned it. But I do feel as if once you start to reach almost a decade on since Automata's release, and yet collabs are picking up, but there is no new substantial content for NieR, the novelty starts to wear a little bit thin. So I really hope it's not too far off, because also Yoko Taro has been like almost teasing that things are happening, and then like a NieR concert rolls around where everyone gets excited expecting a big surprise reveal at the end of like a concert tour, and like nothing happens. And this has been ongoing for years now. And I wouldn't even be mad if NieR 4 miraculously ended up releasing before Kingdom Hearts 4, by the way. Only because it's been since 2017 since a new substantial piece of NieR content has released. No shade to the mobile game, by the way. It is very important to the overarching story of NieR, but I am talking about a proper console entry. It's been a long ass time. Thank you so much for tuning into today's video. Be sure to slippity slap that like button and subscribe if you haven't. Shout out to my wonderful patrons and YouTube members. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, and we'll chat again real soon.